Chapter 5. A Difficult Choice. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Lucas. Ever since he found the book, his life seemed to have veered off the tracks of normalcy. Each new experience inside the stories was so vivid, so real, that he could hardly believe he was still in his own home. That morning, he woke up determined not to open the book again. The fear of possible consequences was beginning to weigh on him. What if something went terribly wrong inside one of the stories? What if he got stuck in one forever? Sitting at the kitchen table, the book lay before him, closed, with its ancient and enigmatic cover. Lucas stared at the object as if expecting it to move on its own. His fingers drummed against the wood while his mind battled against his growing curiosity. He decided to leave the house to clear his mind. He walked through the neighborhood, passed by the park where he used to play as a child, and even stopped at his favorite cafe. Nothing seemed to distract him for long. The book was always present in his thoughts, as if it had its own magnetic pull. Back home, Lucas found the book exactly where he had left it. Maybe if I just stash it deep in the closet, I can forget about it, he thought, trying to convince himself. But as he tried to move it, he felt a strange resistance, as though the object weighed more than it should. He gave up on hiding it and sat back down at the table. "What do you want from me?" he muttered, almost expecting an answer. Of course, the book didn't respond with words, but as he placed his hand on the cover, a gentle warmth coursed through his fingers, like an invitation. Finally, he gave in to his curiosity. Upon opening the book, he found a new story. This time, it was set in the Wild West, a world of arid deserts, dusty saloons, and duels at sundown. The title of the story was The Rivals of Oak Valley. Lucas read the first few lines with hesitation. Before he could change his mind, he was pulled into the book once again. The world around him vanished, and he felt the heat of the scorching sun on his skin. When he opened his eyes, he was in the middle of a dirt road, surrounded by wooden buildings. The inhabitants of Oak Valley looked at him with curiosity and, in some cases, distrust. Lucas realized he was wearing leather boots, a cowboy hat, and a revolver on his belt. Before he could process everything, a woman approached him, pleading for help. She explained that two rival families were on the brink of war over control of a water well, vital to the town's survival. Lucas realized his role was to mediate the conflict, but how could he do so in a place where words carried less weight than a bullet? The negotiation was tense. He had to talk to the leaders of both families, navigate a web of grudges and betrayals, and find a solution that would bring peace without bloodshed. By the end of the adventure, Lucas managed an unlikely but effective agreement. The families agreed to share the well and work together to preserve the region's resources. When it was all over, the town applauded him, but Lucas didn't feel triumphant. He understood the weight of his decisions and the impact each choice had on others. Back at his table in the real world, Lucas carefully closed the book. He knew that continuing to read meant taking risks, but he couldn't deny the transformative power of each story. For the first time, he realized the book was much more than a tool for living adventures. It was a mirror of his own courage, morality, and character. With a deep sigh, he decided not to hide the book, but also to open it with caution. There was much to learn, and Lucas was willing to face the unknown to uncover it. Chapter 6. An Adventure in the Old West. When Lucas opened his eyes, he felt the intense heat of the sun on his skin. He was in a place completely different from his familiar world. The air was dry, and small clouds of dust rose with each gust of wind. When he looked down at himself, he realized he was dressed in typical Old West attire, a leather hat, tall boots, and a belt with a revolver hanging from it. The town around him looked like it had come straight out of a Western movie. Small wooden buildings lined the main street. A group of men conversed outside the saloon, and children chased a skinny dog. The sound of spurs and horses' hoofs echoed all around. Before he could take it all in, a woman hurried toward him. She was young, dressed in simple clothes, with eyes full of desperation. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded. Without fully understanding what was happening, Lucas followed her to the center of the town, where two groups of armed men stood facing each other, clearly on the brink of violent confrontation. She quickly explained the situation. Two powerful local families, the Mendez and the Carters, were at war over control of a water well critical to the town's survival. Without the water, the crops and livestock would die, dooming the entire community. Lucas tried to intervene, but he quickly realized that his initial words, spoken without conviction, wouldn't be enough to prevent the conflict. He would have to earn the trust of both sides, understand their motivations, and find a solution that benefited everyone. Over the next few days, Lucas dedicated himself to speaking with the leaders of each family, listening to their stories, and attempting to uncover common ground. He realized that the conflict wasn't just about the well, but stemmed from old resentments, betrayals, and wounded pride. Meanwhile, the town remained in a constant state of tension. Every move made by either family was watched closely by the townsfolk, who feared that any small spark could ignite a tragedy. Lucas felt the weight of this responsibility. Every word he spoke could either calm the tension or fan the flames. Finally, Lucas came up with an idea. He proposed that the two families share access to the well, establishing specific times for each side to draw water. Additionally, he suggested that they work together to dig a second well on neutral land, with both families contributing to the cost. At first, his proposal was met with skepticism. However, after much discussion, both sides reluctantly agreed, realizing that continuing the feud would only bring further loss to everyone involved. When the truce was announced, the town collectively breathed a sigh of relief. Lucas, however, didn't feel complete ease. He knew his intervention had prevented immediate tragedy, but the future remained uncertain. Back in the real world, Lucas closed the book with trembling hands. He realized that he hadn't just lived an incredible story, but had also learned about leadership, diplomacy, and the burden of making difficult decisions. Every choice he made within the book carried real consequences for the characters and, in some ways, for himself. Despite the risks and challenges, Lucas felt that he was growing with each adventure. With the book in front of him, still mysterious and inviting, he knew there was much more to discover. Chapter 7. Encounter with the Future. Lucas opened his eyes and immediately noticed something was different. The environment around him shimmered with metallic tones and a cold, artificial light. He was in a futuristic setting, surrounded by glass and steel structures that seemed to defy gravity. Floating vehicles zipped across the sky above him, and people dressed in technologically advanced clothing moved with purpose, using devices he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Looking down at himself, he realized he was dressed like a scientist. A white lab coat adorned with futuristic emblems hung over his shoulders, and in his hand was an electronic clipboard brimming with complex data. Before he could process his surroundings, a robotic voice called out beside him, "Dr. Cruz, the meeting is about to begin. The fate of Colony 17 depends on your findings." "Colony 17," he muttered, confused. But the voice urged him onward, and he was guided into a massive conference room filled with holographic screens. Scientists, strategists, and leaders turned to him with anticipation. "Have you found the solution to the rogue artificial intelligence problem?" asked an older man with an authoritative air. Lucas froze. He had no idea what was going on, but as his eyes darted to the holographic data displayed before him, something clicked. It was as if his mind knew what to do, even though he didn't understand how. He began speaking, outlining a theory on how to reverse the failure in the AI system that had led to the machines rebelling against humanity. The room fell silent as he spoke. The people around him nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting hope and relief. However, as Lucas dove deeper into his explanation, he began to notice something unsettling. The patterns in the data seemed familiar. They depicted decisions made long ago that had culminated in the creation of the rogue AI. A chilling realization struck him. This futuristic world was connected to the book he held in the present. Each misstep in the past had contributed to this dystopian future. The adventures he had previously lived through seemed to be clues, lessons meant to teach him the significance of every choice, not just for himself, but for the world at large. At the end of the meeting, he received applause. "You may have just saved humanity, Dr. Cruz," someone said with a relieved smile. But Lucas wasn't celebrating. Deep down, he knew the journey was far from over. Later, in the solitude of a high-tech laboratory, Lucas gazed out of a massive window at a sky filled with countless stars. Holding the electronic clipboard, he reflected on the peculiar connection between the book and this world. Why had he been chosen to experience these adventures? And how did the book seem to know so much about him? Before he could answer these questions, a blinding light engulfed him. The futuristic world began to dissolve, and he felt himself being pulled back to reality. When he opened his eyes again, he was sitting in his bedroom, the book resting in his lap. The words on the page seemed alive, almost as if they were pulsating. A shiver ran down his spine. At that moment, Lucas understood that the book wasn't just a tool for escapism. It was a guide, a bridge connecting the past, present, and future. It offered him the chance to learn, to grow, and perhaps to alter not only his own destiny but the fate of countless others. Chapter 8. The book comes to life. Lucas sat at the edge of his bed, the book resting in his lap like an enigma he couldn't solve. The soft light of the sunset streamed through the window, illuminating the worn cover and the golden details. He sighed, questioning once again what exactly this object meant. This time, when he opened the book, something unexpected happened. The pages began to turn on their own, as if an invisible breeze was moving them. Lucas recoiled, startled, but couldn't tear his gaze away. Words began to form before him, in a handwriting that seemed to be written at that very moment. "Lucas," the words glowed on the page, "you're not just reading. You're being read." Lucas's heart raced. Impossible. A conscious book. He ran his hand over his face, trying to convince himself he was imagining things, but the words continued to appear, as if responding directly to his thoughts. "Yes, Lucas, I know what you're thinking. And no, this isn't a dream." He snapped the book shut and placed it far away, as though it were a dangerous object. He stood up and began pacing around the room, trying to make sense of it all. But even with the book closed, he could feel its presence. It was as if the object was alive, pulsating, whispering in silence. After a few minutes, curiosity won over fear. He approached the book again and opened it carefully. This time, images began to form. They weren't drawings or illustrations, but complete scenes, like windows to other worlds. Lucas saw a version of himself facing challenges in stories he had yet to live. "Why me?" he murmured, almost as if expecting an answer. And, surprisingly, the answer came. "Because you are the one who can change the course of the stories." The book began to show flashes of past scenes he had experienced, the heat of the dragon's flames, the dust of the Wild West, and even the cold gleam of the futuristic world. Each scene seemed to carry deep meaning, as if it were connected to something bigger. Lucas realized that the book wasn't just a portal to adventures. It was a sort of mentor, a tool that helped him discover more about himself. However, there was something unsettling about all of this. The more the book revealed itself, the more Lucas felt like he was being watched, evaluated. It wasn't just him exploring the book. The book was also exploring him. Then, something even stranger happened. The words on the page began to change again, but this time they didn't form a story. Instead, they appeared as questions. What do you fear? What do you desire? What are you willing to sacrifice? Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't have clear answers, but he knew that these questions went beyond fictional stories. They challenged him to confront his own reality, his own secrets. Slowly closing the book, he sat there for a long time, staring into the void. Whatever that object was, it wasn't just entertainment or curiosity. It was a mirror, and Lucas was beginning to realize that with every page he turned, he wasn't just living adventures, but also discovering truths about himself.